Week 8 is mostly in the books, and we saw the value of injury reports this week because Dalvin Cook was technically questionable coming in, but every sign pointed to him being good to go, and he was good to go with a massive outing in week number 8. And we're going to break down Dalvin Cook and talk about every other game on the week 8 slate and talk about all the big takeaways for NFL DFS. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for numberFire. Brandon, week 8 in the books. How are things going for you?
They're pretty good. I mean, it wasn't the worst week of football with all the weather concerns. I mean, some games were kind of unwatchable, but we did get some good football, some big fantasy performances, specifically from Dalvin Cook. So it's kind of, if you didn't have much Dalvin Cook, you probably didn't have a great week. But outside of that, there were still some games that were intriguing. Just not really the primetime games.
Yeah.
So it kind of leaves a weird taste in your mouth whenever.
You mean you weren't enthralled by Wentz v. DiNucci?
No, 2 of the 3 worst performances based on net expected points.
Don't mention the third one, please. My heart can't handle that.
It wasn't Jared Goff.
Oh, wait, what?
No, it was.
I thought it was. Oh, okay.
He was worse.
I was like, oh man, I thought it was Jared Goff. Okay, well, yeah, Jared Goff had a bad day. But Drew Lock didn't. I mean, he had a bad day most of the day. He had a bad 55 minutes, but he had a good 5 minutes, which we'll take for sure.
That's a game-winning drive in the fourth quarter. That'll be that'll be attached to his name
baby.
Forever.
QB wins, baby. That's all that matters.
It's like Tua.
Yeah. 2-0 this week, baby. What could go wrong? We don't talk about Baker or Goff. We're all good. I do want to, before we get into the games, discuss our overall process with wind from this week, because we have some results now, and I feel pretty good about our process because we said lower players, but don't exclude them from your player pool, because I had some Devontae Adams. I didn't have as much as I should have maybe, and I didn't have enough to truly benefit, but he was in my player pool. I had some Dalvin obviously as well, but overall I feel pretty good about the way we played things. We said to lower players, but don't exclude them from the player pool if you think they can still be good plays after lowering expectations. Did you alter your process based on what we saw on Sunday, or do you feel pretty good about where we're at?
I mean, I feel pretty good with where we're at because, this will sound how it sounds, but we base everything on past data. So it's not like we're just, saying ignore the weather or weather's all that matters. Everything we do is, for the most part, grounded in the research. So we were talking about a 4-year sample of games with wind, 1 week of, regardless of what the results were, if they were completely different than the past 4 years, I don't think that is enough to look the other way. So I think we handled it the same way that I'm going to handle it until we really see something change my mind. But this wasn't a week that did that.
Yep, I agree. I feel pretty good about the way things went down. I feel good that the wind kept me from playing Derek Carr over Russell Wilson in single entry. So, thank you, wind. I'm hoping there's no wind in week 9 because we have a pretty sweet Seattle Buffalo game that I would love to stack the loving daylights out of. So wind, stay away, and let us have fun with that game. Let's move into our Week 8 recap, starting off with the Thursday game, Atlanta against Carolina, and there was a lot of weird weather here. Not as much wind for this one, but there was a lot of rain. What do you see with this one between the Panthers and the Falcons?
Yeah, there was just kind of a lot of bad in this game from a lot of different angles, particularly with some injuries to some of the most fun players in the league. Teddy Bridgewater got a really scary hit, left briefly, but did return. I don't know quite how. But Calvin Ridley injured his ankle. The word that's being thrown around for his return is, quote unquote, shortly, but that means nothing. It reminds me of The Office when Pam's trying to set up the new printer and Kevin asks her when it'll be ready, and she says soon. And he's like, soon could mean anything, and she's like, come back soon, basically. So I don't know. This could mean 1 week. It could mean 3. I don't know. The Falcons do have a bye in week 10. I won't speculate from here, but it's possible we do not see him in week 9. But with Ridley playing only a third of the snaps, there was a lot of volume to go around for this Falcons offense. Most of it went to Julio Jones, who ended the game with 10 targets and 137 yards. Hayden Hurst had 7 targets. Russell Gage and Brian Hill each had 3. This is the first real game where Ridley was a non-factor, so should probably put some stock into this usage. He already had 4 targets before leaving on just a handful of snaps because he's that good, but Jones has just been really good when he actually plays. In 5 games where Julio's played relevant snaps, he has 23% of the targets, but Ridley in those games is at 21%. Julio has 34% of the air yards there. You would have to expect that those numbers go up without Ridley in the mix. Russell Gage is at 18%, and Hurst is at 16% of the targets in the split. Again, based on what we saw in this game, I probably have to bump up Julio and Hurst the most. That's kind of how I'm going about it. Russell Gage would get a value bump. And yes, we talk about this all the time. The offense should get lowered without Ridley, but they still have Julio Jones. So it's not like.
So do you think the offense gets lowered more without Julio or lowered more without Ridley?
That's
because we saw them get lowered quite a bit without Julio.
Yes. And again, there's no real sample to look at with this current offense without Calvin Ridley, aside from this particular game. With it being on a Thursday, with Ridley going out early, it's not the fairest comparison, but we saw massive splits for Matt Ryan with and without Julio Jones. So when Julio plays, Matt Ryan's really good, and that elevates the offense. So I think what I'm getting at is this isn't like a Kenny Golladay situation where if Galladay's out, there really is nobody.
Right.
Even taking Calvin Ridley off the field, there's still Julio Jones to worry about. So I think the offense gets lowered from a quality standpoint, but not enough to disengage here. So
okay, cool.
What's your thought on Julio?
No, I agree. I think you're right.
Okay. So definitely this offense isn't toast, but I mean, Todd Gurley, I think Todd Gurley is not really,
toast Gurley.
Not really worth discussing. There were drives in the first half where he was just on the sideline. I don't think it was explained. He is what he is at this point. He has a floor, but no real ceiling. There's the Broncos next week with the 47.5-point total. For the Panthers, Teddy Bridgewater missed only 6 snaps despite that hit. He was pretty rough against the beatable defense, but this was the second time that they faced each other. He was at 0.08 passing net expected points per drop back. League average is about 0.15. The success rate was not close to league average either. And more problematically, Curtis Samuel was a big nuisance to the main players in this offense. He had 3 carries, 5 targets for 54 yards and 2 touchdowns. But, Robbie Anderson did lead the team again in targets with 8. He had 48 yards. DJ Moore had 6 targets, but just 1 empty target in the first half. They just didn't really throw him the ball. That's kind of what it was. In 7 games with Curtis Samuel playing, Robbie Anderson has 28% of the targets. DJ Moore's at 21%. Samuel himself is at 15%. So I'm not really changing the hierarchy. Moore does lead that trio in downfield work with his ADOT, but I mean it's still Anderson number 1, Moore number 2. I'm not going to play Curtis Samuel just because he scored twice. And Mike Davis struggled once more with 77 total yards on 17 adjusted opportunities, which is carries plus 2x targets. Had just 2 targets despite 85% of the snaps. I thought maybe he would share work with Christian McCaffrey when McCaffrey does return. It sounds like McCaffrey is finally ready to return next week against the Chiefs, but I kind of don't think he's going to be that involved based on how he's been. So for me, this offense is McCaffrey, again, if he's healthy, then Anderson, and then Moore. And I think that's kind of what the Panthers are at this point.
Yeah, I kind of think this is what we discussed last week because we thought that McCaffrey might be back for Thursday, but this is kind of the best case scenario for Mike Davis, or I guess for us as DFS players, not for Mike Davis, but if he struggles, it increases the odds that McCaffrey goes full McCaffrey when he comes back, or at least 90% full McCaffrey. Which
is 90% of the snaps because he usually plays 100.
Right, exactly. So Davis's rushing success rate is 5 percentage points lower than McCaffrey's. His expected points per carry is 0.25 worse. That can be fluky because of fumbles. I put more stock in success rate, but McCaffrey's been better, and I think that bodes well. So I would honestly say it's kind of stock up for Christian McCaffrey based on what we saw here. So I'm encouraged by that personally, and I think I agree with you where I'm anticipating a pretty full workload for him. once he does come back. The Week 8 FanDuel Podcast Network Listener League was taken down by CCM21 with a score of 171.64. They had a naked Patrick Mahomes paired with Dalvin Cook and Giovanni Bernard. That's pretty much all they needed to take things down, and they got some sweet, sweet cash as a prize. The Week 9 Listener League should be up sometime today. They tend to go up in the afternoon on Mondays. Once it is, I'll put a link into the podcast episode post up on numberFire.com. You can also enter by going to FanDuel.com/league/listener league once that is posted. $5 entry, 3 entries max, and no rake. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's move now to New England at Buffalo. This was one of the bad weather games, and volume was low as a result. Josh Allen, just 19 dropbacks here. He was super mediocre, even with Stephon Gilmore out for this game. But, Josh Allen had a rushing touchdown to salvage his day for fantasy. He's had a stretch of really unappealing games recently, like games where I wasn't super tempted by Josh Allen, even though I think that Josh Allen's a great fantasy player, whether because of expected blowouts or tough matchups. But next week it's the Seahawks. So we should be high on Allen in that spot, despite his recent rough stretch. Again, please keep the wind away. Rough stretch for Allen, but I'm expecting a bounce back in that one. Even with the muted volume, Stephon Diggs still had 9 targets. He was that was half the team's throws for the game. He has 100 yards in 3 of 8 games this year. He has 85 in 5 of 8. Diggs has 28% of the targets in games that John Brown has played. He's at 29% overall. So Brown played a full complement of snaps. And I think as long as the practice reports on him are good this week, we can include him in game stacks next week. But Diggs is the unquestioned top guy on this team and one of the best, not a top-tier fantasy receiver, but he's pretty firmly in the second or third tier, I'd say, which is good. Zach Moss got a bigger role in this one, but still not enough for DFS. Both he and Devin Singletary had 14 carries and 1 target. Moss played 53% of the snaps, and Singletary was at 48%. Moss scored twice, and he played well. So we might be tempted to chase him, but I will need him to separate more before getting there. It's kind of like a DeAndre Swift situation where he played well, and I like what I see, but I need to see him separate more. And I think he could do that, just like we think with Swift. But I need to see it first because they're probably just going to split work. The Patriots, we're still the Patriots, which means we can basically still ignore them for DFS. Cam Newton's 27 dropbacks led to 174 yards. He was pretty inefficient again, and like Allen, he did run for a touchdown, but I just feel so much better about the passing with Allen that they're nowhere near the same tier for me. Cam's rushing is good, but I don't know if he can generate a ceiling with the passing being as bad as it is. I'm not blaming him for that. I think that it's on the offensive line injuries and the receiver injuries, but it's not. I don't expect that to change. The one potential positive here is that with Edelman and Harry out, Jacoby Myers got good usage. He had 10 of 23 targets. He still got just 58 yards on those 10 targets, so I'm not seeking him out. But if they're in a spot where they will have to throw a lot, Myers is a consideration. That could change if Harry were to be active, but Jacoby Myers at least had something. Damian Harris, kind of similar to Moss, where he scored but still didn't really have a great role for DFS. He had 16 carries and no targets. His ceiling is roughly 16 FanDuel points, and we need more than that, even at this low salary. So, honestly, I'm not really getting there. But, Brandon, I do want to talk to you about Josh Allen. I am willing to buy back very quickly on Josh Allen, assuming we get the go-ahead for next week. Have you seen anything more concerning in the past couple of weeks, or are you okay also just kind of ignoring what we've seen and going all in on Allen again?
Yeah, so it's a little difficult because at this point in the season, you have to figure out what's more relevant, his full 8 games, or is it, a smaller sample of games where he really hasn't thrown the ball a ton, the past 3 games really. I think it's probably safer just to treat him as we typically treat Josh Allen, which is kind of like GPP winning upside with enough efficiency and a very clear stack candidate, or potentially 2, but specifically Stephon Diggs being 1. So I do hope that, people are just kind of over Josh Allen, don't really play him because he does still have the ability to just go off. So I think that this is probably one where I'm trusting the full season sample more than the recent sample. The one big problem is that he was really efficient on deep balls, which was just bound to regress at some point. So I think it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle moving forward, where he's not quite as good, but also not quite as bad as he has been in the past few games.
I also checked the weather. It's currently 7-mile-per-hour winds, so I would take the over on 51 there personally, if you're inclined to do so. Let's move now to Tennessee at Cincinnati. And Brandon, I was talking in Slack on Sunday morning about how it's hard for me to get jazzed about Giovanni Bernard because I could see the Bengals just getting wiped in this game. They didn't have their starting left tackle, their starting center, their starting right tackle, and then one of their guards is ruled out on Sunday because of a sickness, and then they go out and win the freaking game. So I'm stupid. Kudos to you, Cincinnati. I have the over on 5.5 wins, so I needed that win. But what'd you see here?
Yeah, I mean, despite weather concerns, 51 total points here and a very depleted offensive line for the Bengals. But, in another game without Joe Mixon, Giovanni Bernard was solid. He had 15 carries and 4 targets for 23 adjusted opportunities. The one big problem there is that Samaje Perine did have 10 carries. He scored as well. Bernard's snap rate came back to earth a little bit. It was 75% last week, 64% this week. But even if Mixon's going to miss more time coming out of the bye, Bernard's not in bell cow territory. He's in that low mid-range value play area, which, given the state of running back, we haven't had Christian McCaffrey for however long. Ezekiel Elliott's not himself. Obviously, no Saquon Barkley. It's not the same kind of game we've been playing in the past few years where we have to pay up for those guys. They don't really exist for the most part. So these value backs are a lot more appealing than they typically have been for me. So Bernard is still someone I have interest in, but it's going to depend on where the salary goes and whether Mixon's still out when we see them again. Joe Burrow did fall shy of his 300-yard mark that he kind of always gets against beatable defenses, but did have 249 and 2 touchdowns. And there was a little bit of a shakeup with the receivers. T. Higgins led the team with 9 targets. Tyler Boyd and Auden Tate had 7, and A.J. Green had just 5. He caught 2 for 19 yards. Green did lead the team in snap rate among the receivers, so I don't really know. A.J. Green's just still involved, and that hurts everyone, even if he's not getting the most volume. It's still a thing. The downfield work did favor T. Higgins. He had 2. A.J. Green had 1. That was all that there was this week. But I had Tyler Boyd number 1 this week due to the drop in downfield work for T. Higgins, due to A.J. Green being more relevant. I still think it's about the same, though. I like Tyler Boyd the most, but with T. Higgins trending back up this week, I'm firmly okay putting him close to Tyler Boyd. And then there's a drop to, A.J. Green, or I'm not really going to Auden Tate just yet. And they're on bye week.
This team for a second?
Sure.
So I pulled up Higgins' numbers. I've been annoyed with the A.J. Green usage too, but even with that, he has 4 catches for 60 yards at least in 5 straight games, and I always perceive him as being the ceiling play because of his downfield work and his body. I don't know, that's probably weird to say, but he kind of has a good floor too. And if we're favoring, and I agreed with you, I had Boyd number 1 heading into this week, but if we're favoring Boyd for the floor, T. Higgins kind of has a floor too. And I don't know. I feel like you've been appropriately high on Higgins, but I feel like I might have, and I've been high, but I feel like maybe I'm not high enough. I think I haven't really caught on to how good his floor has been.
Yeah, I mean, he's been good, and look, yes, there's volatility in getting downfield targets, but if you catch 1 downfield target, it's probably worth 2 Tyler Boyd targets overall, just because of where Tyler Boyd gets targeted. But the real concern for me with Higgins has just been that A.J. Green's still involved, and if they're going to somehow get Auden Tate targets, I think Boyd is less likely to lose targets.
Okay. Yeah,
that's kind of all I am. That's where I am with it. But I mean, for weeks now, we've been on T. Higgins over Tyler Boyd, but I have kind of changed my tune really just this past week. So I don't know. It's more of a 1A, 1B situation now. But T. Higgins definitely back into DFS close to cash game territory if his salary is where it typically has been. For the Titans, kind of a simple team. Derrick Henry did his thing. That's 18 carries, 112 yards, and a touchdown. Had no yards on his catches, just 1 target, which he didn't catch. But it's It's Derrick Henry. It's unfair to take touchdowns or big plays away from players, but he would have had 11.2 FanDuel points if he didn't score. He gives you nothing but rushing, so if he doesn't score twice, he can't really burn you. It's just a fear of missing out thing with Henry for me. He's going to have a floor of carries. It's just whether he breaks one. It's whether he scores twice. That's really all it is. So I only ever play Derrick Henry because I'm afraid of getting demolished. It's not because I like what he has to offer.
But I think that's a justifiable fear.
Yeah.
I had 35% this week, and I said I'd be 30, so I wound up a little bit higher than I should have been. But I still think the process with him is right, where you ask what are the odds he makes me regret not using him. I thought they were about 30% this week. Maybe I should have been a bit lower, but I think given the way things shaped up for Cincinnati, I think 30% was the right number. He just didn't get that 30%.
Yeah, and I mean, we're still dealing with someone who plays enough snaps and is getting guaranteed rushing work, guaranteed red zone work, but it's just that's all he is, and he's not really salaried as someone who has that wide a range of outcomes.
Sure.
He's kind of salaried at Derrick Henry, going nuts. I kind of prefer the passing offense here, honestly. Ryan Tannehill threw 30 times in these windy conditions, 233 yards, but fixated on his two top targets, in Corey Davis and A.J. Brown. Davis had 10 targets. Brown had 7. Both of them scored. Behind them, 8 Titans had between 1 and 3 targets. So that's fine with me if you're going to at least give 2 guys heavy volume. But if you look at 3 games where Corey Davis and A.J. Brown have both played, Davis actually leads with 27% of the targets. Brown's at 22%. Tannehill has not thrown downfield much, at a high rate, I should say. But Davis in the sample does have a 10.4-yard average depth of target. Brown's at 7.2, problematically. NFL average for receivers is around 10.5. But I don't think I'm ever going to put Corey Davis over A.J. Brown. But I think the real point here is that Corey Davis has a pretty good role in this offense. Ryan Tannehill is efficient, and I think Davis is DFS viable, whereas he historically has been somebody I can't really get to, can't really justify. But, I mean, again, this is a really easy offense to figure out. We can play Henry if we're afraid not to. We can play Ryan Tannehill if the matchup's good because he can be efficient. And then A.J. Brown and Corey Davis are probably in play at their salaries. But, that said, they host the Bears in Week 9, which is not the most fun matchup.
Have the Bears ever played a fun game for DFS?
Not since I've been playing.
I guess they had that one game where Trubisky blew up against Tampa Bay.
That's not but that's not
with Tariq Cohen and Taylor Gabriel catching bombs down the seam. That was fun.
Who is it? The Lions. He always throws the 3 touchdowns against.
Exactly, 3 touchdowns, and it's never.
I mean, there's that.
But that's disappointing. I wish they'd play someone else, but whatever. I think I agree with you that Davis is in consideration now, which he had. I mean, I used him, I guess, on Sunday.
Yeah. But he's not.
I didn't feel great about it because the targets were so empty the week before. I used him. I was like, the salary makes sense. I want to stack this game at times. So
So he's.
I feel better about it now.
Yeah, he's 6,000, and I understand why. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to view it. The 2020 NFL season is chugging along, actually halfway over now, and there is no easier way to get in on the action than with FanDuel's Gridiron Pick'em contest. All you have to do is pick the winner of each week's matchups correctly. You'll take home a share of the $5,000 weekly jackpot. The best part, it's completely free to play. We are already on to week number 9 of the NFL season, so what are you waiting for? To enter for free, visit playfree.fanduel.com/gridiron. That's playfree.fanduel.com/gridiron. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's move now to Las Vegas at Cleveland, and we saw the full effects of the weather here as both teams really elected to go super run heavy, and it led to an easy under and a pretty much dud of a game across the board. And as a result, the Raiders didn't throw that much. We can still have some takeaways here. The first is that Darren Waller's going to be the top guy here. That's not a change, but Henry Ruggs was tied for second with 4 targets. That's actually the second most he has had this year, which A, is bad, but B, it doesn't mean we should use him. His usage is still very thin, but John Gruden did say he needs to get Ruggs the ball And they did get him some shorter looks this week. So he's worth monitoring yet, but not yet worth using. I think that he's someone to keep your eye on for sure, because if he were to get a bump in usage, he could be really, really fun, really, really fast. So keep an eye on Henry Ruggs. Wouldn't get too pumped just yet, though. Josh Jacobs had 31 carries for 128 yards. He had just one target out of 22 targeted throws, though. So it was good to see Jacobs get that work, and he was more effective than he had been recently. But the heavy usage, and the heavy usage also says he's healthy. So a couple positives for Jacobs, but the concerns we've had recently about him not getting good work in the passing game still have not been eradicated. We didn't see them in a negative script here, so I'm going to keep status quo on Josh Jacobs, except maybe viewing him a bit more healthy than he was previously. This was likely Kareem Hunt's final game without Nick Chubb, and he, again, failed to take advantage. He had 14 carries and 3 targets. This will go back to being an annoying backfield after the bye, and honestly, Kareem Hunt was scoring more fantasy points in his old role than this one, which sucks because he had so much potential, and I lost a lot of money on this guy over the past 3 weeks. The wind made it hard to get too many takeaways from the first game without Odell Beckham, but it did lead to a target spike for Jarvis Landry. He had 11 of 25 targets here. His previous high for the season was 9. It was just his second game with more than 6. So it's hard to tell what the upside is with Jarvis because it's such a weird game, but he's at least in play, which I didn't really think he was previously before the Beckham injury. I'm going to go ahead and put him ahead of Rashard Higgins. Higgins still had a good role. He should get downfield work, so I'll put him in the same tier. But Jarvis a 1A, Higgins the 1B in this offense right now. Harrison Bryant lost a fumble but still played a ton and ran routes in almost every drop back. So disappointment for sure, but it's still status quo with him until Austin Hooper is back. He should be back after their bye, but regardless, the other guy to keep an eye on here is Myles Garrett. He left with a knee injury. Their defense after Garrett got suspended last year totally tanked, and they've been a bad defense even with him so far this year, and he's been playing lights out football. It's not his fault. They've been bad. So the Browns defense is already one we should target, one of the best to target in DFS. If Garrett misses time, that's going to be even better. So hopefully Myles Garrett's okay because I enjoy watching him. But I think that keep an eye on that because he
likes dinosaurs.
Yeah, I mean, what's there not to like about that? Am I being too harsh on Josh Jacobs for not getting super excited about a 31 carry game, or are you in the same boat as me?
I would imagine that the expected fantasy points were probably a lot higher. I didn't see a whole lot of this game on Red Zone.
Wonder why.
So I don't know how involved he was. I could look this up, but I did not. In the Red Zone, I would imagine he had a pretty firm Red Zone role. 8 Red Zone carries. So I think, again, based off of box score scouting, 55% rushing success rate, all those carries, I think we can probably be about the same on Josh Jacobs, maybe a little bit higher though. The issue with Jacobs is I think he was kind of priced up, and I didn't play a lot of him because of the salary. It seems like he's one of the few guys where the salary is always higher than I want it to be in order to sort of feature him. Wow, James Conner's 8,200 next week.
Who are they playing?
Cowboys.
Wow.
Jacobs is 7,700.
What?
I think that's a fair price.
James Conner's ceiling is 2x that salary.
James Conner, watching him, it always seems like once he gets 10 yards downfield, which seems to happen fairly frequently, he just tucks the ball and is
he's
ready,
shocked. I think he goes into a state of shock and he's like, oh, why are there no defenders tackling me? How did this happen? Is this an accident? Am I dreaming this?
Okay.
Anyway,
Josh Jacobs at 7,700, I think is a fair price. He's got one of the best workloads in football. So maybe I'm higher on him than you are, I think.
I think we're pretty similar. I think I might be a little bit lower, but we're close enough. So let's move on.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
He's an obligation snake draft play, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. Let's move on to Indianapolis at Detroit. And I said I didn't want to go at this game because it was tough. And like, technically it went over, but like, none of the players I would have used it like, oh, I'll stack Jonathan Taylor with Kenny Golladay. That sounds great. Nope. What'd you see here?
Yeah, so I mentioned entering the week that every game had at least one red flag. The red flag here was undesirable market shares for DFS purposes. And even though there were 62 total points, if you don't feature anybody, like nobody scores a lot of fantasy points. Phillip Rivers was efficient. He had 3 touchdowns, 262 yards on 33 attempts. But even with T.Y. Hilton leaving with a groin injury, just nobody was featured. There were 34 total pass attempts. Zach Pascal threw once, but no Colt had more than 6 targets. That was Pascal himself, and that means he led with a 17.6% target share.
They become a parody.
I mentioned this entering the week, but there are only 4 instances on the whole season now where a Colt has better than a 20% target share in a single game. That means there's no ceiling for players, but there's also no real floor if you're looking at like 13 to 17% of the targets, even up to 20%. That's just not there. And I don't think there's any reason to dig in to these pass catchers. And in the backfield, it's a similar issue. Jonathan Taylor was kind of like an if I have to play this week due to the overall lack of great running back options prior to lock. And he had 11 carries for 22 yards, but Jordan Wilkins had 20 carries, 89 yards, and a touchdown. Taylor played 34% of the snaps, according to NFL.com. He's played no more than 59% of the snaps since week 3. And over the past 5 weeks now, he has more games with fewer than 50% of the snaps with 3 than he does playing a majority of the snaps. So 50% of the snaps is kind of my cutoff with running backs. You have to be really efficient. You have to be in a really good situation if you're going to play around 50% of the snaps for me to consider you in DFS. I think Taylor's just fully off the radar at this point. Nyheim Hines and Jordan Wilkins both outplayed him here, but Wilkins himself was at 51% of the snaps. Hines played just 21%, scored 2 receiving touchdowns. So, like, there's nothing here. I called them before the worst DFS offense in the NFL, and I kind of stick with that because like the Jets and the Patriots are objectively in bad situations right now. At least the Colts feel like they should be better, so it's always like a trap. That's just how
the Jets and the Patriots are what they are, and we know that. But the Colts are like they're fake good.
They like draw you in, and you're like, you know what? Maybe this is, but it's never. And they play the Ravens next week. So
good. That helps. That helps a lot. So honestly, they're great next week. I can just avoid them fully, and I feel great about it. So yeah, this is good.
The Lions are somewhat similar with how they use their players, and Kenny Golladay. Sorry, I had a pop up over all my words. Kenny Golladay left early with a hip injury after 18 snaps, which is 30%. Matthew Stafford did throw 42 times. The Lions ran only 13 times, so at least we had that. It's kind of like the Chiefs this week. So keep doing that. Let Matthew Stafford cook.
Very similar game scripts where the Chiefs were up by 40 and the Lions were down by 20.
With Golladay going catchless on his 4 targets, we did see TJ Hawkinson get 10 targets. Both Marvins, Jones and Hall, had 7 targets. Marvin Jones scored twice. Hall had 113 yards. Hawkinson had 65 yards. The downfield work was there for Marvin Jones, who had 3 downfield targets this week. Golladay had 2 of his own before leaving. If you look at games where Galladay's been out or left early, you have to keep in mind that Quintez Cephas was a factor in the first 2 games with 17% of the targets. But outside of that, Marvin Jones leads the team with 18% of the targets, which is not great. You would think if Cephas isn't really a thing, he could get up to around 21%, but that's still its own thing. Now, he is getting decent high leverage looks in these games with 1.7 downfield targets, 2 red zone targets per game on 7 total. That's a little bit appealing. TJ Hawkinson's at 16% of the targets with not a ton of red zone work, which is not what you want to see for a tight end. Danny Amendola's at 15%. But, Marvin Hall barely played in 2 of those 3 games, played 69% of the snaps this week, ran 33 of 47 routes. Like Marvin Hall probably, like, if you're really into this team, you'd have to consider Marvin Hall. But, I'm not really sure that there's a situation where the volume can, overcome the value lost with Golladay being out. So it's not the same situation as I have with the Falcons. Stafford without Golladay is at 0.05 passing net expected points per dropback, which means he's just not very efficient. So I think you have to downgrade this entire offense. The backfield had virtually no rush attempts, but DeAndre Swift, don't let it fool you. He was the go-to guy this week. He had 38 snaps. Adrian Peterson had 12. That works out to 62% of the snaps for DeAndre Swift, which is a season best. Had 4 targets. If you look at the most recent work and you really cherry pick the best, most promising sample for him, he's at 18.3 adjusted opportunities per game over the past 3. So that's not enough. If they have to trail for him to get 62% of the snaps, can't really bank on that. Now, they are at the Vikings in week 9. Total's 52.5. I think it's actually up to 53 right now. So maybe DeAndre Swift gets more work, but I'm still not going to prioritize him.
No, it's going to be an Adrian Peterson revenge game. 20 carries, 50 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That's how it's going to go.
Yeah.
With this, I know that Golladay being out does lead to more downfield work for Marvin Jones, but I just don't see the yardage upside despite the downfield targets. I think he's just not as good anymore. I don't know. This could just be me being stupid, but I have a really hard time talking myself into Marvin Jones, even if there's no Golladay. I'd rather go at Hawkinson because he fills a terrible position. He's $6,000 against the Vikings. That's kind of high. Other Marvin, good Marvin, is $4,600. I think I'd rather use good Marvin than Marvin Jones.
Yeah, so that's what this is kind of alluding to. Marvin Hall is probably somewhat in play. He's been way more efficient than Marvin Jones on a per-target basis. Marvin Jones hasn't been that bad on the full season.
He kind of has.
In terms of expected points per target, he's about league average, a little higher. So
Man.
It helps that he scored twice this week.
Yeah. I'm pulling up Marvin Hall's his player profiler page. I want to see if we can get some excitement here. Yeah. 80th percentile 40-yard dash, but he's kind of skinny. 89th percentile burst score. Marvin Hall week. Let's do it. Good Marvin is in play for week number 9.
Yeah, I should jot that down before I forget, which I inevitably will.
Hopefully Galladay's healthy. We can just not worry about this. But maybe we'll get a situation with Kenny Golladay like we had with Dalvin Cook this week. Speaking of Dalvin Cook, let's move to Minnesota at Green Bay, where Dalvin Cook was technically questionable going in, but it was obvious all week he was good to go. He practiced in full on Friday. Everyone had said he would be good to go. He tweeted out shirts about his comeback, which is weird. So that's why it's important to know the context in this stuff and not treat all questionable people equally. Dalvin had 30 carries and 3 targets, so he's back into the top tier at running back. It's nice to have more bell cows around the league, so this is a big plus. And I think that we should be excited about Dalvin Cook going forward, but also just know the context behind injury reports because not all questionable tags are equal. The Vikings threw just 14 times, so not much can change here. One interesting note is that the Packers used Jair Alexander to shadow Justin Jefferson instead of Adam Thielen, so we shouldn't assume who will see shadow coverage on this team. It could be either guy. But outside of that, keep things pretty even here. I thought it was very interesting that Alexander was covering Jefferson. We shouldn't assume we know exactly how coaches or coaching staffs are going to, use players in situations. I know. Shocker, right? Breaking news from the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. The Packers actually threw 41 times, and Aaron Rodgers was pretty good. He went for 291 yards and 3 tutties with no picks. But more importantly, the targets were concentrated. Despite 39 targeted throws, only 3 guys had more than 4 targets. Devontae Adams had 12. He turned it into 3 touchdowns because, of course, he's very good. He has at least 10 targets in all of his complete games. He has 38% of the targets in that time. So he's the top receiver in football right now, and I feel pretty good saying that. Second in targets, Robert Tonyan. He had 7. The main reason was because Marquez Valdez-Scantling got the squeeze with just 1 target. So that's good for Tonyan, but they're likely to get Alan Lazard back next week. So even with the good usage here, I'm not inclined to chase this game for Tonyan and expect that going forward. Lazard will be interesting, though, once he is back. So I'll be very okay with him. With Aaron Jones out, Jamal Williams was the guy again. He had 16 carries and 6 targets. He averaged 28.5 adjusted opportunities per game in the 2 games with no Aaron Jones. Jones should be back this week, but I have no reservations about Jamal if Jones is out again in the future. They play San Francisco, so not on the main slate. But Brandon, let's talk to you about Dalvin Cook. Name that salary for week number 9 against Detroit.
13. Realistically, I'm going to throw out a number, and you're going to tell me that I'm stupid. But I think based on all the context of what goes into a realistic running back salary, probably like 93, and I feel like you're going to say like 97, 98.
No, I can't say 97 in this offense, which is so volatile and inconsistent.
Okay, because I'm always lower on running back salaries than you are.
You're lower on most salaries than I am, but he's 93 exactly.
I'm just more of a curmudgeon in general. So
no, but I think that like it's okay to be curmudgeon-y given that like the Vikings offense has games where it literally just like it collapses.
Yeah.
So and I think that bumps him down 400. So 93 is appropriate, and I think
should be a good spot though.
Right. And like I don't really have any really reasons for concern. I think that like it's worth noting that like the passing game is still very viable with Jefferson and Thielen, so don't like forget they exist.
He is 93. He is 93. I didn't know.
Yep, he's exactly that. So
I think that the question. Good.
No, go ahead.
The question is going to be McCaffrey at 95 or Dalvin Cook at 93, and if it's why not both, then we're back in like classic heat check territory where we're allocating all the money to running backs.
I feel like it's Dalvin because of the situation, right? The game?
Like the game?
Because like I worry about, like I love Teddy, but I worry about Kansas City, or I worry about Carolina not, you know.
But when the Chiefs played the Broncos,
that was on the road.
Okay.
Also, like that was a situation where no one is on that game. People will be on this game.
Yeah.
So,
although I don't want popularity ever to change how I view Christian McCaffrey, but I probably will let it happen by Sunday.
Yeah. We'll definitely talk more about that, but I think I'd probably go Dalvin by a hair in the situation right now. Let's move now, speaking of Kansas City, and talk about their game against the Jets. They did not run the ball. They decided to keep on slinging it despite being up by 30 or whatever points. So, I mean, the Chiefs are just fun. I didn't like have anything. So like that was definitely one of the errors in my process this week. I know why I didn't. So it's not like a situation like, oh, why'd you do that? But like, I don't know. I'm okay with it because they're fun and like I enjoy fun teams.
Yeah, I mean, the reason to be low on the Chiefs was just blowout potential, and they did win 35-9. The thing though is like they kept it up, and it wasn't a full blowout from the start. Somehow it was like they basically got 21 points or whatever, and it felt like they were ahead 21 points, but it wasn't 40 points or anything crazy. So they just kept doing their thing. And we did see some Chad Henne, but only after Patrick Mahomes got 42 pass attempts for 416 yards and 5 touchdowns. Didn't get sacked once. So there were some big receiving lines as a result. Travis Kelce had 8 catches on 12 targets for 109 and a touchdown. Mecole Hardman, 7 catches on 9 targets for 96 yards and a touchdown. Tyreek Hill, just 6 targets, but 98 yards, 2 touchdowns. And even Demarcus Robinson had 5 targets for 63 yards and a score. If you look at this team's target shares since Sammy Watkins' injury in Week 5, it's Travis Kelce who leads the way with 24%. That works out to 8.5 per game, but 2.8 combined high leverage targets. Tyreek Hill is at just 18%, but I mean he gets 2.3 downfield targets per game in that sample, 3.3 high leverage targets overall. We know that a target for Tyreek Hill is very valuable. And then it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 14% in this sample. So I think it's really still a two-man show at the top in terms of the passing game. Not a whole lot to change here. I know everybody wants Mecole Hardman to be the guy, and I understand it. I'm not saying he's not, but here's just the data from this week. I know he had a good receiving game, but 68% of the snaps. Byron Pringle had 56%, and Demarcus Robinson had 55%. Hardman ran 31 pass routes according to Pro Football Focus. Robinson was close behind at 28. Pringle was at 24. I don't think Mecole Hardman really separated enough to just go at him in DFS, so I'm not quite there. And despite the dominant win, the Chiefs ran just 20 times, so the backfield didn't really get a whole lot of work, at least to show us any separation. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Le'Veon Bell split 12 carries down the middle between them, but Darrell Williams and Darwin Thompson had 7 carries between them. So I think the best place to look is probably the first half data. 4 carries for Bell, 2 for Edwards-Helaire. Each had 2 first half targets. Overall, Edwards-Helaire did play more snaps, 33-17. He ran way more pass routes, 24-10. I think Edwards-Helaire is the 1A, but I really have little interest in a split backfield because this was like very positive game script, and neither of them came close to having any usage that made you feel like you had to use them on FanDuel. They host the Panthers in Week 9. That's a 12.5-point spread in favor of the Chiefs. Total's 51. I think I'm, need to be more in on the Chiefs offense, kind of regardless of game script. So I'm going to make that adjustment. And I was kind of overweight on Mahomes this week anyway, but not enough Dalvin Cook for it to matter. The Jets are kind of a catch-up spot here.
We can just skip it.
You don't want to talk about Denzel Mims getting 42 yards in the first half for the second straight week and then getting 1 empty target in the second half? Because it happened twice in a row.
I was told he was going to light it up with 10 targets this week for more than 50 yards.
Well, I mean, he could have had that. He got just the 3 targets, but Braxton Berrios had 11 targets for 34 yards.
I mean, I understand, sometimes you got to feed your best player. So Braxton Berrios getting 10 targets makes 11 targets makes total sense.
What about Jeff Smith getting 8 for 29? I mean, Denzel Mims should be really good. I don't know.
Yeah, I like Denzel Mims. I just think people got a little bit too jazzed about a dude on a team with a 15-point implied total.
You mean we don't know exactly how coaches are going to use their players every week?
It's not about usage. It's about the team.
Yeah, but it's also about you. I mean, if Denzel Mims had 11 targets or even the 8.
Braxton Berrios had 11 targets. He didn't do anything with it. I know the different players. I'm just being a dick.
Denzel Mims had more yards on 3 targets.
I know. I'm being a dick. Go ahead.
Okay. But I think if Mims were to get like the 8 targets, there's at least some yardage upside. But the real problem is touchdown equity with this team. So at least we get Patriots Jets Monday night in Week 9, so we don't have to worry about guessing right on.
That's a rematch of the Sam Darnold Ghost game, which is really fun. Okay, so the Panthers are a team against which we always target running backs. How low would Clyde Edwards-Helaire's salary need to be for you to like him in that game?
For like a cash game?
No, for like 20% exposure in tournaments. Because I think that like in a vacuum, I don't want 20% despite the matchup right now.
Yeah.
So how low would his salary need to be to get you there?
Probably like 61.
Yeah,
that's probably a little high even because when you share touches like that, you have to have the perfect game to have your upside. You have to score all the touchdowns. Probably have to break a run or a catch for 40 yards at a clip. So not
Clyde
really
Edwards-Helaire is $7,000. Le'Veon Bell is $5,500. I don't think either of them is like a priority at that number.
No.
Like, I think because the spot is so good, you can talk yourself into having Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but like you have to do some mental gymnastics to feel great about that. And like I don't want to do that.
Again, for him to pay off even a $6,000 salary, he has to kind of like with half the snaps, whatever, losing touches, and obviously Patrick Mahomes can just throw all the touchdowns. For him to go for $7,000, I mean, he can maybe pay that off.
Right.
But for him to like put up the floor is too low for cash games and the ceiling's not really there for tournaments.
Yep. Especially because like the spots where Le'Veon Bell is the biggest threat are the money touches in the red zone and in the passing game. I know that Edwards-Helaire is like a passing game specialist in theory, but like
I've seen him drop way too many passes. They stick with me. That's why I don't watch film.
Yeah.
That still sticks with me.
Film makes us worse. Let's move now to Pittsburgh at Baltimore, where Deontay Johnson got banged up again, and he came back in the game, but I don't know, like, apparently he was fine, but it did allow Chase Claypool and Juju Smith-Schuster to suck up a couple of extra targets. Claypool led with 9, and Juju had 8. Juju actually turned that into 67 yards. That's the second straight week above 65, but I'm still going to rank him below Claypool and Deontay. Juju is less of a cross-off than he was previously. Like, he's a little bit better than Greg Ward now. I'll give him that. He's the 1A. Greg Ward's the 1B. It's just hard to love the floor of anybody here when they're all healthy. So I would say Claypool, like, I just like the high leverage targets. His floor sucks with Deontay being healthy, but I like the ceiling still. So I'll put Claypool 1B behind Deontay as a 1A, and I think that's the way I'll rank them. Juju is in a tier below both for me. James Conner had a very James Conner day. He had 15 carries and 3 targets. His realistic range of outcomes is 12 to 22 FanDuel points, and that's just like, it's not worth it to me. I'll talk to you about him after this because, like, he's obviously in a very interesting spot next week, but it's just so unappealing. The Ravens offense continues to be just kind of okay here. It's part matchup, it's part weather, but they've also been just middling the entire year, and now they're going to miss left tackle Ronnie Stanley for the year with an ankle injury. The good thing is he got paid on Friday. Like, he got this massive extension, so I'm happy for him for that. Like, go get your money, but, like, it stinks now that he's hurt. It's a big loss to the team. So I was betting on regression and going hard at the Ravens offense here and going at Marquise Brown, but we may not get that regression now with Stanley being out. I would view them as around like a 12th ranked offense going forward, and that's not where they were to start the year. With a tight game, Lamar did run 15 times. That was the second time this year he's hit double digits. That at least confirms my theory that we should target Lamar most heavily in tight games. We should also try to get those tight games against lesser defenses, but, I think that the process there is right. Target him in tight games most heavily. Marquise Brown finally had a bad usage game. He had just 2 targets. His previous low was 6. He was on the field the whole game, so I'm not going to cross him off, but it's a good reminder that the floor here is super, super shaky still, despite the fact that his target shares are good. Willie Snead had 7 targets. Mark Andrews had 6. Snead popping up would be a problem because there are so few targets to go around, but if we look at the full season, Brown is still at 25% of the targets. Andrews is at 22%. So I'm not going to change my views here. It's still just Hollywood and Andrews favoring Hollywood due to the salary, and none of those guys have good floors. So I had too much Marquise Brown. Like, for his floor, I had too much. Like, I should have had less. That was a pretty big error there. With Mark Ingram out, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards had decent usage. Dobbins had 15 carries and 2 targets on a 66% snap rate. Edwards had 16 carries and 1 target on 33% of the snaps. Those touches are going to be hyper efficient because Lamar opens up so many rushing lanes, but they won't be as big of a touchdown threat as they were with now that Stanley's out. So I'm open to Dobbins now, which was not the case previously, but he's not a priority target by any means. I want to talk about the other running back in this game, though, Brandon, and James Conner, because, he gets Dallas next week, but, I just don't understand, what's his realistic ceiling to you?
20 to 23.
Yeah.
Probably 20.
And it's just not high enough.
No.
It's just I don't know. Maybe I'll talk myself into him by Thursday, but I don't want to.
I feel pretty confident in saying I will have 0 James Conner for next week.
I don't know if I'll have 0. I'm a scaredy cat, but I just think that that salary does not line up with the ceiling. The floor is great. The floor is totally fine. The ceiling is not.
Yeah, but if you're paying for floor, I don't know.
Don't pay $200 for it.
Yeah, his usage is basically David Johnson level. David Johnson gets the Jaguars. That game's got a high total.
He's a little bit better than David Johnson.
Yes, but
yeah.
What's David Johnson here? Because I bet the gap is not 68, but that 1,400.
Yeah, is the talented
I don't think the gap between those two is $1,400 big,
right? Especially against Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Name that salary for J.K. Dobbins, assuming that Mark Ingram is out, because I think we both rank Dobbins higher, but Name that salary based on what you saw.
I'm probably be low on this, but like I don't really think he can crack like 64, and I feel great about it. So
I said 6,000 in my head.
okay,
Because like it's not great workload. It's a tough defense. There's no Ronnie Stanley. So like there are enough factors there where I'm still pretty wary despite an objectively good game. His salary for that one is
53.
53. So at that salary,
that's different.
Yeah, like not a cash gameplay because Gus Edwards can still get the rushing touchdowns, but like, that's enough to be interesting, right?
Yeah, the thing with him is that he's really efficient.
Yeah.
So it's hard to kind of look just at the carries, but it's also hard to assume efficiency for running backs. That's why I always chase volume for running backs, because efficiency can come and go. And if you really try to predict yards per carry in a one-game sample, you're just wasting your time, really.
Right.
So I think Dobbins is definitely in play at the salary, but again, not cash game level.
Yeah.
What's Myles Gaskin? I think we're about to talk about him. He's 59 against the Cardinals.
Yeah.
All right, we can talk about Gaskin.
Yeah, let's go to the Rams at Dolphins. I'm going to take my earbuds out so you can say whatever you need to about Tua and Goff, and then I won't get mad at you. So proceed. I'm just going to be here.
Okay. The Dolphins won in Tua's debut, but it did not have much to do with him. The Dolphins had 2 defensive special teams touchdowns. So Tua didn't have to do much, just 22 pass attempts, completed 12 for 93 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks. That was negative 6.42 passing net expected points, which just not good. You want to be adding expected points, not losing them. Threw downfield just twice, once to Preston Williams, once to Mike Gesicki. Didn't complete either. Had an average depth of target of 5.4 yards. So it's really no surprise that his lead receiver was Myles Gaskin, who had 6 targets for 16 yards. So Gaskin led in targets, but also led in yards with 16. Preston Williams had 5 targets. Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki, Durham Smythe, Jakeem Grant all had 2. It's really tough to take much away from this. If nothing else, I was just excited to see, and try to figure out what the market shares are going to look like. I don't think we can really take much away from this. The lead was large from the start. We did not see Tua unleashed. I don't think that Myles Gaskin is going to triple up Devontae Parker in targets moving forward. So didn't really learn a whole lot. And that kind of sucks. What we did learn, though, or at least have reinforced, is that Myles Gaskin is very enticing. He had a big workload, 18 carries, 6 targets, 88% of the snaps for him. He's played at least 63% of snaps in every game, has at least 4 targets in every game. I think he's a really good low-end play. I already saw the salary of 59 against the Cardinals next week, which is intriguing. But we get Tua versus Kyler, so I think Jim might have a. I don't know if you're going to make it to Sunday.
I mean, I should have been excited about this one, but
That's true. But yeah, I don't think I learned anything really about the Dolphins with Tua. So that's tough. And I don't think that Tua is going to be, terrible. So I don't think even the efficiency is something that we can kind of lock into. Now, for the Rams, I wavered on them before lock. I ultimately shifted kind of away from them due to their market shares. This is one of the games where I pinned as undesirable market shares, but it was probably dumb because of this game's overall context compared to others, and didn't have to worry about market share for Cooper Kupp because he had 21 targets out of 61 pass attempts. That was 34%. Gerald Everett, Josh Reynolds had 9 targets. Robert Woods had 8, but after that, it was all spread out behind them. So, I mean, this team does feature certain players, but with so many featured players, they don't really have amazing market shares. But after this big game for Kupp, he does have 25% of the targets on the full season, which is 8.9 per game. The ADOT's just 7.3 yards. He's got just over 1 downfield target per game. Not a whole lot of red zone work. Robert Woods is at 19% of the targets, which is 6.8 per game. Does get almost 1.5 downfield targets per game. 8.2 yard average target depth for him. Jared Goff just not quite slinging it a ton. Josh Reynolds is the guy who does get proportionally the most downfield work. His ADOT is 13.2 yards. He does lead the team at 1.6 downfield targets per game, but just 13% of the overall targets. It's It's not the most appealing passing game overall, but it's also not the worst. I would rank them at this point, I think, Cooper Kupp over Robert Woods, and then Josh Reynolds as like more of the GPP flyer. But on a full slate, Josh Reynolds is not really somebody who I'm interested in. Running back Darrell Henderson did leave early with a thigh injury, played just 18 snaps, was 19% because they ran 92 total plays. So, we did get to see some Cam Akers finally, 9 carries, 1 target, but Malcolm Brown had 10 carries and 2 targets. Now, before this game, I dropped Cam Akers because I had to in a season-long league, and I don't say that because anybody cares, but the logic was that even if one of Darrell Henderson or Malcolm Brown got hurt, at best, he was going to be the 1B in a committee. That is more valuable in season long than in DFS, but it's still not really enough. Brown played 60% of the snaps, and Akers was at 21%. Brown would be the guy. I don't think that even if Darrell Henderson's out, Cam Akers is really in play. They're on bye in week 9, so I don't know what the Henderson injury is going to look like, but I don't know what Cam Akers has to do to get more than 21% of the snaps in a game where he had 10 opportunities on 92 plays. Like,
seems good. I would note that the Rams, this is apparently their 4th East. We were talking about this on Covering the Spread this past week. This was their 4th East Coast game in like the past 6 weeks, and
it seemed like they've been.
Yeah, so they need this bye, and I'd expect them to rebound quite a bit after the bye. I might be a tiny bit higher on Josh Reynolds, but it needs to be in a script where they're going to throw, because like he's at a 16% target share from week 3 on, where he passed Van Jefferson on the depth chart. But like, whatever, it's whatever. What do you think Myles Gaskin's salary should be? Because I would probably say like 67-ish or so. He's 59. I think that like probably about $800 of wiggle room there. Or are you in the same boat as me?
The number that jumped into my head was like 68.
Okay, cool.
Because the offense isn't perfect, but his role is really good. And that game should have points. So, yeah, I think Gaskin's just another. He will really help me get to potentially Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook next week.
Yeah, and that's attractive given the spots that they are in. So let's move now to the Chargers at the Broncos, and just imagine doubting Drew Lock. It couldn't be me. I would never, because Lock did play poorly most of the game, but it's kind of what he is. He's super volatile. He is exciting when he sucks. He is exciting when he's good. He's just not boring. You can always use a defense facing him, but he can also do this. So he is what he is. With Tim Patrick out, Jerry Jeudy and Noah Fant got good usage. They had 10 and 9 targets respectively. Deshaun Hamilton had the best production on 5 targets. KJ Hamler had just 3. My guess is that when all of Patrick, Jeudy, and Fant are all healthy, things will be a bit spread out for a below-average offense to get jazzed about any of them. The one exception to me would be Fant. He has a 21% target share in the games he has played, and even in a bad offense, that's enough to be viable at tight end. The receivers, though, kind of spread out. The problem is they're facing Atlanta next week, and we're going to want some pieces of that. So I'll talk to you about them in a second here. Phillip Lindsay had a huge touchdown run, but it didn't lead to any separation from Melvin Gordon because Lindsay still played 45% of the snaps compared to 55% for Gordon. Neither guy got more than 22 adjusted opportunities. So as long as both are healthy, this isn't a backfield to touch for DFS, especially because Atlanta's better against the rush than they are against the pass. So, I'm not really there. Justin Herbert threw a couple of picks, which is part of why this game was close, but they let him throw 43 times again despite a positive script. So I'm counting it as a positive regardless, especially because Denver's defense is not bad. We saw Mike Williams come to life a bit, something that hasn't happened in games with Keenan Allen previously. Williams had 8 targets for 99 yards and a touchdown. Keenan had 11 targets for 67 yards and a touchdown. Williams' previous high in a game with Keenan and Herbert was 4. So this is encouraging. He's also good enough to convert when he does get volume. So Williams, I would say, is in play for game stacks now, which probably wasn't previously, at least for me. I don't know. Maybe that's too low. But Keenan still has at least 11 targets in every full game with Herbert. So he is still an awesome player outside of game stacks and amazing for game stacks. But Williams is up, and I'm going to put him at least on par with Hunter Henry, who has disappointed quite a bit recently, not just from a target perspective, but also from like a yardage perspective. It's been annoying for Henry for sure. Joshua Kelly seems like he's fallen out of favor here. Not only did he play behind the amazing future Hall of Famer Justin Jackson, But also Tremaine Pope got a lot of run too. I thought Tremaine Pope was a fullback. I don't know why this is in my head. I was like, oh, he got 7 targets. That's weird. And I was like, oh, he got 10 carries too. Like, I don't know. For some reason in my head, he's a fullback. He's not. So Kelly
is a fullback name.
Yeah. Tremaine. Like you're messing people up with that name. So Kelly is not a DFS option. Jackson kinda is. He had 17 carries and 5 targets. That is the second time in 3 games with no Austin Eckler where he has had at least 27 adjusted opportunities. I still question if Jackson will get touchdown chances, and that's a big negative. But he's showing juice as a rusher and a receiver, so I would say he's like a less safe version of Myles Gaskin. I don't know. You can buy or sell that comp, but I want to talk to you. Just give me your thoughts on Justin Jackson, then I'll talk to you about the Broncos in a second.
I don't know if I'm like – it's hard because I know Myles Gaskin's salary. I even know J.K. Dobbins is at a really low salary. It's kind of hard for me to put someone like Justin Jackson where I have concerns and assuming his salary's closer to Gaskin's.
I would say he's like 62, but like that's with the context of Gaskin being undersalaried.
He's also 59.
Okay.
So
we prefer Gaskin for sure, right? But
yes.
Jackson's like not off the map at that number.
Not off the map, but I also don't really view them in like this quite the same tier. But I probably am lower on Jackson just because I have like issues with any Chargers running back, just from a trust standpoint.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's interesting is that the only week where he had bad-ish usage was because he was on the injury report with a knee injury, and he was healthy this week, and like he got good usage this time. That could just be me digging for like an explanation for why the usage has been up and down. They could just be like game plan dependent, but I don't know. I think it's tough for me to go above 62 for him because like it's not locked in that he gets good usage.
Yeah, I mean, no touchdowns yet, which is probably fluky, even if the usage isn't quite right.
Yeah.
With all the yardage, you usually score. So, I mean, I'm not out on him, but I was lower on him until you kind of sold me on him.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about Denver here because they will be interesting against Atlanta. I think that Fant is interesting. Name that salary for Noah Fant against Atlanta.
Probably like 62, 63. Too high, maybe.
I guess I'm a little bit lower. He's 58 though, and I think that's appropriate. Like
anytime a tight end has a pulse, I get a little excited.
Yeah, and like I thought he was over salaried this week at $6,000. I thought that like that wasn't like I like his usage. Oh yeah, way better spot. Yeah, for sure. 47 yards. I mean, he's been solid. So like from a target perspective, so I don't think like he's one of the guys, like I tend to have lower exposure at tight end because I know it's super volatile. So like I think he'll be one of the guys I filter in. Would you agree with that assessment of Fant?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. Any interest in the receivers, or are we good I mean, like you can use them, but like no one really stands out there.
Yeah, who do you use, and will anybody really have enough work in a single game predictably to kind of like focus on? And I don't think
if Patrick were like healthy, I'd feel best about him, but he's not.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Let's move to San Francisco at Seattle, and the final score is good. The route to the final score is very weird. What did you see with this one? DK Metcalf finally vindicating us?
Vindication. Yeah, pretty good game overall, 37-27. Perhaps, the read on the 49ers wasn't the best, but we did get the Seahawks as usual. Russell Wilson, 261, 4 touchdowns on just 27 attempts because he's Russ. DK Metcalf was the one with the big usage this week. 15 targets, 12 catches, 161 yards, and 2 touchdowns. By contrast, Tyler Lockett had 5 targets for 33 yards. It's bound to happen where one guy has a better game than the other, but with how frequently eruption games happen, you have to be okay being wrong. Just play both, sometimes in the same lineup. I do that quite a bit with these two specifically. The real differentiator is just downfield targets. If you look overall at their target shares, Lockett is ahead at 24.6%, which is 9 targets per game. Metcalf is at 23%, which is 8.4 per game. So again, pretty close. Red zone work is 1.3 per game for Lockett, 1 for Metcalf. So again, pretty close. But again, the differentiator is the downfield work. Metcalf's averaging 3 downfield targets per game. Lockett's at 1.6. The average target depth for Metcalf is 14.8 yards. For Lockett, it's 10.4. That's not as close, based solely on their own data, not matchup or salary or popularity. I think you have to prefer DK Metcalf by at least a little bit because of those high leverage looks. And honestly, if Metcalf blows up, it's close enough for me to go with Tyler Lockett the next week, because it seems like people did like to chase Tyler Lockett this week. In a depleted backfield, unfortunately, we didn't really know how this was going to work before 1 p.m. lock, but no Chris Carson, no Carlos Hyde. Is DJ Dallas, who really churned out the top role with 18 carries and 5 targets. Wasn't particularly efficient, just 41 rushing yards on 18 carries, 17 yards on 5 targets, but scored twice, once on the ground and through the air. Played 79% of the snaps, and by comparison, Travis Homer just 1 carry, 10% of the snaps. However, with how close the other backs seem to be to playing, you'd have to think that Dallas just doesn't take over for good. And, they play Buffalo next week, so really want to see how this backfield shakes out. Again, I don't really think DJ Dallas is going to have the backfield to himself for next week. I think that's one of those games where you stack it and forget it, though. That's what we talked about on Slack, just throwing it out there.
Don't let me talk myself out of this game.
I have to take the L on Jimmy Garoppolo. He had been efficient, and he was facing one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. Got hurt late. George Kittle left early. He's getting an MRI on his foot. Tevin Coleman hurt his knee again in the first quarter, the same one that had him on IR. So Jimmy Garoppolo just 84 yards and an interception on 16 attempts before leaving. Nick Mullins came in and replaced him and did some stuff, 238 yards and 2 touchdowns on 25 attempts while playing from behind. With Deebo Samuel out, the team's passing offense fixated on Brandon Ayuk, who had 11 targets. Kendrick Bourne had 10, both cleared 80 yards. Ayuk scored late. So, something. Nick Mullins has attempts in 4 games. 2 of those came when George Kittle didn't play, so it's probably the most relevant to look at Mullins with Kittle. So just 2 games there. But Kittle has 22% of targets in those games, which is 9.5 per game, averaging 111 yards in those games. Really good usage. Ayuk in that sample is at 19% of targets, which is same as Kendrick Bourne, which works out to 8 targets per game. They have identical ADOTs between Ayuk and Bourne, but Ayuk has more of the just sheer downfield work. So also a little bit more involved in the red zone. I'd put George Kittle number 1, followed by Ayuk, but Kendrick Bourne's not really out of play, and he's never been somebody that I've focused on so long as Deebo Samuel's out. And Nick Mullins has been pretty solid, 0.27 passing and expected points per dropback. Same as Justin Herbert, Deshaun Watson, a little bit better than Matt Ryan. So I'll probably go back to this, offense when they're in the main slate if Nick Mullins were to start, which I don't know. I don't know. Jimmy Garoppolo got kind of benched but hurt twice. I don't know. It's a tough one to figure out. And the backfield, also a tough one to figure out. JaMychal Hasty had 12 of 18 running back carries. Tevin Coleman had 3 carries on 6 snaps before leaving, but Hasty played just 41% of the snaps. Jerick McKinnon had only 3 carries and -1 rushing yards, but did score. Also had 4 targets for 40 yards, and despite the low volume, he actually was on the field for 50% of the snaps, according to NFL.com. But the plan last week was to rest him, and we didn't really know that. And so I don't know. Like, Hasty's probably the RB1 here, but if you said you felt good about any of them or actively wanted to use them in DFS, I'd really like to hear your thought process, because I don't understand.
Like, part of the allure of the 49ers is that they're a good offense with the running backs, but will they be a good offense if Deebo, Kittle, Jimmy G are all banged up? Right?
Probably not, no.
Yeah, so I agree. Like, if you like them, tell me why. Convince me, because I don't see it. So I think that it's pretty tough for them. It's just like, there's so many injuries, and like cluster injuries matter, and that's where they're at. They've been in the cluster injury zone the entire year, so that's pretty brutal. I think that you're right with Lockett and Metcalf. Like, yes, Metcalf is higher, but Lockett, the gap is not big enough where you just use Metcalf every week. Like I had way more Metcalf this week than I had of Lockett this week, but like next week I'm fine going back to Lockett. So I think you're spot on.
Also, it's really easy to say that if you play a lot of entries, like if you play multi-entry tournaments, if you're someone who plays one lineup and you want to play one of these two guys, just try to do yourself a favor and duplicate that lineup. And
you're right.
And just play the other one. If you
find two similar contests that are single entry, use one lineup in one and the other one in the other, and just do that.
Yeah, I think this is just that good of a situation.
I wholeheartedly agree. So let's move now to New Orleans at Chicago, and Alvin Kamara just continues to be disgusting. He scored 20.8 FanDuel points without a touchdown, which is so hard to do. That was like Christian McCaffrey level in 2019. He would do that. I'd love to get touchdowns. Touchdowns are good. I know this is a shocking statement for DFS, but touchdowns are good, but they can come with a guy this talented, and his floor is, if he doesn't score, is monstrous. So he had 12 carries and 13 targets, which is 38 adjusted opportunities. So yeah, he's going to lose some targets with Michael Thomas back, but the increased touchdown potential makes it a worthwhile trade-off. So Kamara is like definitively the RB1.
Yeah. Unless we get McCaffrey back at full McCaffrey.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll buy that. It was likely the final game without Michael Thomas, and Marquez Callaway and Emmanuel Sanders were also out, so it'll be tough to draw too much here. Jared Cook and Traquan Smith both had 7 targets. Traquan may not even play when those guys are back. Like, I had too much Traquan on Sunday, and like I regretted it immediately because I just don't want to use this dude for whatever reason. Cook will still get targets, but like it'd be around like 5 targets per game, and that could work in game stacks, but that's about it for them. So I don't know, like just. They're rough. On the Bears side, Anthony Miller got a decently big role change here. He played 76% of the snaps, which was a season high. He ran around an 85% of the team's pass plays, and he got volume in it with 11 targets, which was most of the team. Darnell Mooney still played a bunch, so this was more of a formational change than anything. It means that Miller works if you're stacking a game or into the Bears offense, which wasn't the case previously. So that's a role change for him. Allen Robinson still had 7 targets and looked great on them, so he's not changing. It's more so just bumping up Miller and making him relevant, whereas he was not for DFS previously. David Montgomery kept his bell cow role. He had 21 of 22 running back carries. I'm counting Cordero Patterson as a running back because I feel like I should. He added 5 targets, which is 31 adjusted opportunities, and he actually broke a long play, which never happens. So, hey, miracles do exist. He's not going to get you big yardage usually, and this offense doesn't score many touchdowns. But if you expect things out of the offense, Montgomery is at least in play in those scenarios. They are on the road against Tennessee next week. That's probably not a great spot to be super jazzed about Montgomery. But Anthony Miller, kind of interesting. Brandon, did you see enough in this game where you can actually justify using Anthony Miller against Tennessee, or are you worried it's a one-game blip?
I mean, usage changes are not even necessarily targets, but snaps and routes. Something we have to take into consideration for sure. I like Anthony Miller. I feel like we've seen this from him before, though, because I'm always looking for like the Anthony.
He actually did do it last year for down the stretch. He actually came through.
Yeah. So I think you phrased it correctly where he wasn't someone I would even consider when I was stacking the Bears. He would be someone, especially at the salary of 5,100. But Montgomery's also 59. So it'd be interesting to see how people go with Gaskin, Justin Jackson, and David Montgomery at the exact same salaries for next
Rank
week.
them.
Gaskin, Jackson, Montgomery.
I think I might go Montgomery Jackson, but Gaskin's number 1 to me. I agree. Yeah. But I think it's, they're all at least viable. I'm sure we'll talk more about them on Friday, but they're at least viable to differing degrees. Because I think the Gaskin is very viable. The other one's kind of, whatever. But we'll talk about them, I'm sure, on Thursday. So let's move now to the exciting Sunday night football game. Carson Wentz continues to go full Josh Allen, and not in the good way. Ben DiNucci, tough situation for him. I feel Like, you get your first NFL start, and it's behind a duct-taped offensive line. It's a tough situation for him. So what'd you see here?
Yeah, this was the not ready for primetime game.
I'm waiting all day for Sunday night, baby.
23-9 win for the Eagles, despite just a poor overall showing from just about everyone. The two quarterbacks were two of the three worst quarterbacks in passing net expected points in Week 8. They lost at least 15 expected points each. Only one other quarterback also lost more than 8. So, it was just not good. Carson Wentz had just 123 yards in a game where Dallas Goedert and Jalen Reagor returned, but Travis Fulgham, despite that yardage, still got to 78 and a touchdown on his 7 targets. Reagor played for the first time since Week 2. He had 6 targets, 16 yards and a touchdown. Goddard had a single target for 15 yards. Greg Ward had 5 targets. The team has had a lot of injuries, so it's kind of hard to figure out what they really want to be. But this was the first game where Reagor, Goddard, and Fulgham all played, so I think we can probably assume that Fulgham is still the wide receiver 1 on this team. He and John Hightower led the team with 2 downfield targets. Reagor had 1. Rager's ADOT was 12.5 yards, which is pretty promising. But I'll be in on Dallas Goedert as well. Despite the volume here, he played on 84% of the snaps, ran 76% of the pass routes. So I'm thankful to have Dallas Goedert back. With Miles Sanders out, again, Boston Scott got some low-end RB1 treatment. Maybe I'm just higher on the actual numbers here because I like Boston Scott. It's not that great of usage. 65% of snaps, 15 carries, 2 targets. It feels different than a Todd Gurley, but Todd Gurley can get 15 carries and 2 targets playing 65% of snaps, and I have no interest. But I think the yardage upside somehow is better with Boston Scott. But they go and buy in Week 9. I don't know if Miles Sanders is going to be back, but if not, Boston Scott is definitely usable. For the Cowboys, they're pretty. It's not great. Ben DiNucci's not gotten it done. He's at negative 0.43 passing net expected points per dropback on the full season, which is worst among qualified quarterbacks. League average about 0.15 on the positive end. So, but it sounds like Andy Dalton was doing well on Saturday. He might return for Week 9 against the Steelers, which would be very welcomed.
No.
Dalton's also got a really small sample. I'll phrase it as less bad than Ben DiNucci because, again, Ben DiNucci's been the worst qualified quarterback so far. I don't know if it's still it's a matter of it's better, but it's still not good. So how does that affect the skill position players? I don't know. At least if Dalton doesn't return, Michael Gallup's got 30% of the targets from DiNucci on the season. Most of that came from this game, though. I don't really. Again, it's if Andy Dalton plays, is it?
I'm not touching any of them against the Steelers. I don't care if it's Dalton or I don't care if it's Jameis via a trade. I'm not touching any of them against the Steelers.
If Jameis went there, I would be all in on this offense.
No, the offensive line is terrible. They're going to get wrecked.
Doesn't matter. Jameis.
The Steelers have a 30% pressure rate this year.
Jameis would go for 600 air yards.
Yeah, and 16 picks and no completions. Name that salary for the Steelers defense next week. If you say anything lower than $1,600 or $16,000, I'm kicking you off the podcast.
They're probably is there a max of 5,000 on FanDuel?
Well, okay. I've seen above before, but they don't go. They're exactly 5,000.
Okay. So yeah. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott had 19 carries and 2 targets, but 73 yards and no touchdowns. He's
still losing work to Tony Pollard in a terrible offense.
Yeah.
Would you take a punch to the midsection or rather use a Cowboys player? I'd rather get punched.
No, I'd rather just burn a lineup than
I'd rather get punched.
I have no interest in getting punched in my life.
I'm not in the face. It's just in the gut.
Don't care.
I'd rather get punched.
No.
I'm picking the punch. Just to I'm standing firm by this. Whether it's Dalton, DiNucci, Danny DeVito, I am going with the punch.
Oh man. There's no total yet because I don't know quarterback situation. I don't know, man.
Eagles are on bye. What are we feeling about this team coming out of it? Let's assume that there's still no Alshon because, like, I don't know if it matters. Let's assume Sanders is back, but, like, are we in on Jalen Reagor after the bye? I would probably still put Fulgham first, obviously, but, like, would Reagor be in consideration zone for you? Because I feel like he probably would be for me.
You know, he should be. If he's going to be at around, what do you think, like probably like 20 to 22% for Fulgham, unless you're higher and think he's like, because that's kind of where like team high target shares kind of get. So Reagor would probably be in like the 18% range, maybe.
Yeah, it depends on how tight they keep things. Like if they push out the Greg Ward targets, if they push out the Richard Rodgers targets, like they could concentrate things more, but like maybe they won't. I don't know. Maybe I'm just looking for people to use. I think that Rager's interesting.
He's interesting. What I'm getting at is he's not going to get like, I can't comfortably project him for 20+% of the targets.
Yeah.
And that means he's getting like, no matter how you slice it, 15 on the low end, but like 20% probably on the high end of targets from an inefficient quarterback.
Yeah. Fair. Okay. So I think that makes sense. Any final takeaways for you from week number 8, Brandon?
There were some strange, obviously strange weather games here. So overall volume was a little peculiar for a lot of teams, but I think market shares still stick from a lot of these teams, aside from maybe like the Dolphins. It's honestly, it's hard now because I was talking to you before the show pretty much yesterday, and teams like the Panthers, I don't need to overthink it. I know what they are. It's like Robbie Anderson followed by DJ Moore. And like, I don't want to be looking for like an Anthony Miller is probably a good example. I don't know if I'm overreacting to Anthony Miller in this sense because we're looking for takeaways or if it's real. So
yeah,
I think we need to make up your mind on like what samples you trust, because at this point we all know the bad defenses. We all know the good offenses. We all know the injuries. It's kind of at this point coming down to figuring out what is real and like what's not.
Yeah. And that's very tough, but like it's a necessary endeavor to at least try, because if you're right, there are a lot of upsides in being right, whether you're rejecting a recent sample or fully embracing it. Just decide how you want to go, because there are a lot of upsides in doing that. So dig into things, try to decide why things changed, and decide if that will be the case going forward, and proceed based on that. As mentioned, the Week 9 FanDuel Podcast Network Listener League should be posted sometime today. I'll put a link for that in the post up on numberFire.com for this Week 8 recap podcast. Also, just go to FanDuel.com/league/listener league to get yourself entered. $5 entries, 3 entries max, and there is no rake. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. We are back again on Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube page, recording the Week 9 preview podcast. It'll be up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed immediately after. We'll also have a PGA podcast tomorrow, YouTube 10 a.m. numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed immediately after. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck with your Monday Night Football single game slates. We'll talk to you again on Thursday. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.